Thanks everyone for coming. My name is David Prager. I'm one of the executive producers of the film, and I work at Automattic. Automatic's the company behind WordPress and Tumblr and WooCommerce and a few other companies you guys have probably heard of. Before we begin, I wanted to give a quick shout out to the other two executive producers who couldn't be here. Chenda Nak, who's our head of comms, and one of the people who's been integral in getting behind this campaign and getting it off the ground. And also Scott Willey, our director of video, and also one of the executive producers, and he's the creative bridge between the team and the filmmakers from the very first cut. So I want to give them a huge shout out and welcome. Also want to thank our incredible events team for having helped put this together, and everyone on the comms team that's out here also for helping put this together. It's been a lot of work, and we're really excited to do this. So a little over a year ago, I wrote down a treatment for a film, and it started with a simple question: what happens if the web disappears? Not in some distant theoretical future, but now gradually as the platforms we all depend on get more closed, more controlled, and more extractive. We wanted to make something that would help people understand what open source actually is. Not as a technology concept, but as an idea about ownership, about who gets to build, who gets to participate, and who gets to decide what the internet becomes. We partnered with an extraordinary filmmaker named Bao Win to bring this story to life. What they created exceeded everything we could imagine, and it's not a branded video, it's not a commercial. This is a film about the movement, and it belongs to everyone. It's about 20 minutes, and in those 20 minutes, you're gonna meet some of the people who are in the building and who are also building the open web. Some of them are in this room tonight, and after the screening, we'll introduce a pretty cool panel and have a conversation about this, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So please enjoy the film, thank you.
Howdy. I'm Ethan Tobin Lindsey. I'm the editor-in-chief here at KQED, and it's a genuine pleasure to co-present this evening with Automattic. Can I have the panelists join me on stage? I'll introduce you when you're up here, so come on up. So you just watched a film that calls itself a manifesto for the open web. And it lands at a specific moment that I think we can talk about tonight, which is that right now the web is sort of quietly resorting itself. Sites are blocking AI crawlers by default. Publishers are suing AI companies over training data and more. And infrastructure providers are literally putting price tags on what used to be free and open. So joining me is Matt Mullenweg, co-founder of WordPress and CEO of Automattic.
Good to see everybody. I like that the curtains came up. It's like the open source. The light is coming in.
There you go. Michael Dinh, the producer of Code for the People. Michael. And Paula Smith Arrigoni, the executive director of BAVC Media, for those of you who don't know, used to be the Bay Area Video Coalition. So Matt, let's start with you. You spent the 2 decades saying the open web is worth fighting for. We see a lot of that here. You've called WordPress the dark matter of the web. So one of the things I was thinking in watching it is that it feels like it's trying to connect with those of, those of us who went to computer camp and did build our own computers, but also just like those of us who live and operate in the world. So when we look at this, what happens for those of us who don't know the depths of like open source? What actually changes in their life if the open web loses? Like, what do we lose if that they can't get back?
Ooh, what do you lose? Well, who's ever been on a network that was mentioned that closed down? Or on a current network that hasn't closed down, but you know someone whose account has been closed? Right? You lose your Google account or your Apple account, and your life's over. And you have no recourse. Have you ever tried to contact support in one of these companies? You can't depend on them. And it's not because the companies are necessarily evil. They're just like, they got other things they're doing. And so I think as people start to experience this, particularly some of the folks who have grown up in sort of the mobile age, which the sort of mobile app era was much more intermediated perhaps by centralized marketplaces like Apple's store and thank you, and the Google Play Store. So they've seen probably an app go offline that they used or a game be banned because the companies are fighting with each other or things like that. So they start to see part of it. But we haven't yet experienced like the huge wave of things shutting down unless they were into crypto.
You know, it's funny. I set up my OpenClaw server, and it's the first time I felt like when I took the box off my x86 and started putting it's one of those moments that we haven't had in a while because it's sort of mediated for us in a way. One last question before I move to others, which is I think we get to it at the end, which is that we're at a crossroads right now, which is that with AI could be built openly and accountably or closed. So right now, the most powerful AI systems in the world are mostly closed and proprietary. So is open source winning or losing in the AI world right now?
Well, actually, it's funny. Since this came out, the open source has caught way up. You've probably seen a lot of the stories about how for a tenth of the cost, you're getting 80 or 90% of the performance just a few months later from an open source model, which is going to create some interesting pressures on the funding and everything around this current investment cycle. But I think one beautiful thing is they're not necessarily at odds. And in fact, many people who started their careers proprietary later go on to do open source. In fact, actually, part of the reason I was talking about my dad there is his whole life was like building Microsoft stuff. And so we grew up, it was all proprietary. But he very much encouraged me, like as the web was coming on, to like, check out this Perl thing, check out this Python thing, check out the web. And so I was kind of like the next generation that went open source, but now we're seeing it happen. Like, look at Jack Dorsey, very successful like Twitter and Block, and invested a ton into Bitcoin and Nostr and Blue Sky and all these sort of open systems. And you see that over and over. The WhatsApp founder now running Signal, which is open source. So I like this, that as we grow and learn, that you can start to incorporate more and more open source, and it can actually be part of someone's season of giving back.
Michael, as a producer of the film, I'm sure you worked with Bao Wen, the filmmaker. Those of you who don't know, Bao has made films about BTS, Bruce Lee, and the one that I have seen is the We Are the World documentary. Have you seen that? Phenomenal. So what does it say that a director known for cultural icons decided to work on an open source code as the next project?
I mean, on the surface level, those are very different subject matters, right? I mean, but when you look at the impact that these people have made on the world, there's a through line there. There's people that have kind of rallied behind and supported something that was bigger than themselves, right? It's the impact on culture. So even though open source doesn't have a face like BTS or Bruce Lee, it's impacted millions of people around the world, and so I think that was kind of the early start of like, why is this worth exploring? Because the impact on people, and so I think it's different subject matters, but the impact is tremendous. So.
Was it a challenge? It feels like this, the film, and kind of what Matt's saying, there is optimism. I think oftentimes tech documentaries are not optimistic. They're sort of like, here's the movie, and then algorithms are going to destroy us all. So how do you frame that? How do you think about optimism in that way?
I mean, first and foremost, we're naturally optimistic people. We're realists. We know the gravity of what we're up against. But when you tell this story, and we were looking at the cinematic optimism connection, like how do you tell that story? Coding, typing, as sexy as it is, it's not cinematic, naturally. But you peel back the onion and you see that it's a human story. And so, we kept on going back to the early discovery of it all. When somebody made something online for the first time, when somebody felt connected, when they were able to express themselves, like, all that moment of discovery, like that gives you optimism. Then it becomes less abstract in that sense. It's an emotion. It's something that you feel. It's something that you work towards in your daily life. So then you look at all these stories and the humans behind these stories, and you realize that they're not just idealists writing code. They're trying to save something that is about freedom, expression, and connection. So I think that in a nutshell, that's what we consider optimism.
Can I add
Yeah, of
something
course,
to that,
yeah.
Ethan?
Paula.
I really love that, and I think what a couple of things that I really liked about this film. I love seeing Matt, just your origin story in the beginning, and like, you know, kind of tinkering and looking over your dad's shoulder. And I feel like so many people can relate to that experience. And it's also active. And, you know, what I love about open source, particularly in this moment, but also before, is just that you are an active participant. You have agency. You can take code, you can take pieces of it from different things and build something new for a new purpose. Like at my organization, BAVC, our preservation team does open source, and one of our preservationists is here. You wouldn't imagine that that happens, but it does. And we share that with librarians and universities and small arts and culture organizations around the country. So it's actively being used. And I think what is so needed right now is this sense of control and agency. And we're not just being consumed, we're actually making things for ourselves and for our communities and, you know, putting it to use. And I think that's so powerful because so many people feel overwhelmed right now.
Well, do you think specifically for the independent content creators you work with, the themes of ownership of digital platforms, so, you know, specifically, probably they're thinking about it a lot or dealing with?
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, ownership, I mean, your own work not being stolen, that's a huge one. Having the ability to consent that, you know, somebody's going to use your content that you've worked so hard, you've pulled all these resources together to make, and it's just stripped away, you know, so easily. So I think absolutely, I think open source combined with also the idea that you could have a small language model and have your own, you know, proprietary data instead of using stuff that maybe you can't trace the source to. There's a lot of exciting things that I think within independence people are more excited about than some of the other, you know, just using the standard big foundational models.
You know, one of the things you were talking about is how BAVC has been supporting independent storytellers. So specifically, whether they're open source or another, how are the tools changing, whether it's AI or otherwise right now for them, like sort of with open source as like a back, or maybe even the ownership of those tools? How does that influence them?
Well, that's such a great question. I mean, I'd love to pitch that back. I think it's a both. I think in some ways there's so much more ease. You don't have to be a developer to create code. There's so many tools. That's the beauty of this AI moment right now. And I know, you know, WordPress, you all are doing that and making it easier for anyone to build a beautiful website. That's so important. But I think that this point of open source and not giving up the act of becoming knowledgeable, you know, not learning about how is this made? Where is this data coming from? How do I integrate this into other things that I do? Like, we actually still need to do that. I think that's part of our digital civic participation requirements in this new era. So to me, it's a both, but I would love to hear what Matt says.
It's also a lot of fun.
Yeah.
You know, you break it and then you're like, oh, what happens? You're Googling. Has anyone ever done the view source on a web page? It's a little trickier now. It's a little more complicated, but just that idea that you can kind of like open the hood, see how it works, is beautiful in open source. And to know the optimism of things, I mean, I think part of the reason that tech sometimes gets, rightly so, because it's very powerful, a lot of criticism, is that almost all of the companies start out with a very idealistic, optimistic story. And we can all think of ones that we feel like let us down at some point.
Make the world's information free for everybody or whatever it used to be?
Oh, but not my information. That was too free. No, it's, but the beautiful thing about open source is that it's like trust but verify. You don't have to rely on the benevolence of whoever's leading it or anything else. It's built into the constitution of the software. The legal rights that you have for open source software are inalienable. They cannot be taken away. And so that is really powerful. So even if I go away or Automattic or anyone else in that video, if we turn evil, if whatever happens, the software is still there. It's still yours. And you can fork it, you can change it, you can keep it forever. It's great for preservation and continuity. So actually, my very first post, I talked not about backwards compatibility, but forwards compatibility. Like, how do you build things in a way that it's likely to still work in 10 or 50 years?
Well, do you think? I actually, that was the scene that got me, was your, you know, the first post and the. Do you think that with vibe coding that's more possible now, or do you think it's like that creation is less? we're less connected to the creation and we lose a little bit?
Well, that's a good question. It depends on how you use it. So you can use it in a way that's completely disconnected, which I do sometimes too. It's kind of nice. But when you combine sort of the vibe coding or LLMs with existing open source, you can get the best of both worlds. When you're doing something completely from scratch, you're probably maybe recreating some primitives or some priors you're reinventing the wheel in some ways. Or maybe you're inventing a new way to do a bridge that hasn't been tested a million times. So take a base of an open source. Could be WordPress or anything else that's, had a bajillion users. It's been, it's runs on everything. It's been security tested out the wazoo, et cetera. And make that a base and then put something on top of it. And what you could put on top of it now is amazing. Like before, honestly, you can do things in 20 minutes with one of these coding agents that would have cost $5,000 or $10,000 and taken 4 to 6 weeks. So that's incredibly empowering. And that's what I love when technology kind of puts that power in the hands of all of us. And for all the criticism of the AI companies, this is a radically accessible technology right now, meaning people all over the world, you can just go in there for free or very cheaply. And that's pretty powerful. Now, there's implications. I don't know if we need to get into all that, but I do like that it is it's very accessible to everyone.
Michael, you were talking about how coding and keyboarding is not a cinematic. I mean, this is very powerful, but it's also like that sort of broader. Those metaphors are also probably hard to be cinematic with. How do you get the ideas like that across?
A really good sound composer. It's a really heady subject, right? And when you're dealing with like a documentary, you're relying on a lot of survey, storytelling. You're really, again, going back to the people, the people that have lived it, the people that, went through this. And so, I think just going back to the human story does a lot of the hard work, because that's really what's behind this whole thing, right? It's humans, lest we forget, all this technology, it was created by us. This is a tool. This is something that is, within our grasp. It's the wizard, not the wand, right? So, and then, just being able to describe abstract ideas is always like a filmmaking challenge, right? There's only so far you can go, and then, you do have to, whip out the crayon and a paper and show people visually. But yeah, hopefully we got the message across and made it really a human expression of what we're going through.
Matt, what was that like for you, like being it's sort of like the frontline documentary interview? Right now it's actually, I don't know, it's like that's just the meme on the internet. Everyone's doing their Netflix documentary moments. What was that like for you?
It was an interesting process. It was really, I was really kind of just there for the interview and checking in some things, but really driven by the team, and they did an amazing job. Like you said, it can be challenging, but it's also sparked what conversations can this start? So for example, if people see this, how can we make it clear to them that actually every single one of you here in this room can build on open source? You said it's people just like us. Everything that you use in technology was built with people just like you, and many in that video did not have a fancy college degree or something like that you think of like the normal gates to participating in this world. So everyone can be a builder, everyone can be a creator. I know your organization has done so much for that, and I love that.
It's funny that you used the free beer analogy here, because when I was a reporter at Marketplace, I did a story about free beer. It was a brewery in Copenhagen that open sourced their recipe. And they were using it as like a metaphor for open source. It's free beer as in freedom, not free beer. But it was free beer, so it was confusing. Okay, let's move. We can people. We're going to be around. You can ask questions. But let's do a last words. Sort of like thinking about this, where we are in this moment, what we're thinking about. Paula, what's your takeaway having watched this and thought about this really deeply?
I'm just thinking about free beer still.
Yeah, free beer. It's coming later.
my takeaway, I mean, this is really exciting for me. I think we've needed some energy here in the Bay Area. I think we are inundated with AI billboards and, things that we don't understand. And I think that this just feels empowering, and I really appreciate that. So I just think participation, sense of agency, and trying to build new things that actually work for our own communities.
Michael?
I think my takeaway is just the spark of curiosity. Like Matt was saying, like we're all capable human beings of creating, doing something, lifting up the hood, tinkering, and it doesn't have to be that intimidating. So I think my takeaway is like, send this film to a friend, send it to your network, send it to anybody that you're working with in terms of using a technology as a tool. And like ask more questions. I think right now it's not time to sit back and just observe and be sheeple. It's time to rise up. Like this is a movement, and this is a point in time. And looking back on it, like what are we going to say that how we experienced this time? Did we learn more? Did we contribute? Did we hold people accountable, or did we just watch the world burn?
Matt, give us an optimistic take. Take us home.
Optimism.
Well, I will say open source doesn't have billboards, but we do have stickers. I don't think we officially have some, but I have some in my backpack. I'll leave on that table. If they wind up someplace appropriate, that's part of the word of mouth. That's really how we spread. And actually, if you study all the other CMSs, the competitors, the Wix, the Squarespaces, et cetera, they still spend hundreds of millions of dollars per year in advertising to achieve a fraction of the market share of WordPress. And they're great software, actually. Some parts of it are better than WordPress, but they don't have the community. They don't have the word of mouth. They don't have that sort of belief in something, the ownership. As good as it can be, you still will never own your Wix site or your Squarespace site. In fact, Wix does not even allow export. Isn't that wild? But anyway, yeah, we're working on that. We have a data liberation team, actually. We're going to free all the sites. But freedom is not free, in that you do have to fight for it sometimes. And that's uncomfortable. People like when it's all positive and things like that. But there is always sort of a creeping insidiousness. And we hear about it a lot in sort of politics or other things. But open source is actually kind of constantly under attack in ways you wouldn't expect. So one example right now is there's age verification rules going around. There's talk about putting this in operating systems and how that works. And then you sort of dig down and you say, well, how does Linux do that? Like, they don't have a way for the OS to be locked down that a kid can. So some of these laws, which have good intentions around protection, or we need to decrypt all the instant messaging so we can protect the children. There's some truth there. There is bad things that happen, but breaking the encryption for everyone is a slippery slope. And as we know, in a free society, can actually have a lot of negative downsides. And so keep an eye on this. Listen to the Cory Doctorow's and the EFSFs of the world, and the folks that say, hey, this thing that sounds really weird, this little bill over there, we need to make a big deal about this. And they can usually cut it off, nip it in the bud. You might remember, what was that card they were trying to put in all the cable boxes in the 90s? What was it called? Cable card? Yeah. V-chip, that was it. DRM of various sorts, all these sorts of things. There's lots of ways people sneak in proprietary things, even to open systems. And in fact, open systems are far more vulnerable to it, because there's almost like a game theory where the person who takes advantage of an open, high-trust system will be at an advantage because it has no natural defenses. So tell your friends, vote with your wallet, so choose open source when you can, even if it's a little bit. And don't forget to fight.
All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you all for coming. Thanks to Automattic.
And thank you. We weren't doing Q&A, but I'm happy to answer. I think we were going to take drinks.
Questions over drinks.
Yeah, we'll go over there.
So I